Today's video is called No Accidents in God's Plan. It's Ephesians chapter 3 verse 1, where it says, "For this reason I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you Gentiles." Here we see that Paul, for the first time, I think, in the letter, mentions the fact that he is in prison, and it's a testimony to Paul's confidence in God's sovereignty, that he's writing to encourage the Christians in Ephesus from the prison cell. Paul saw God's hand in every situation. When Paul calls himself the prisoner of Christ Jesus, he doesn't say the prisoner of Rome. That's remarkable, that's where he was, but he doesn't call himself the prisoner of Rome, he calls himself the prisoner of Christ Jesus. He's chained up, he's confined and limited, yet he still sees the situation as being under Christ's control and not Caesar's. Sam Gordon says, Paul was so convinced that the whole of his life, including his time in prison, was under the lordship of Christ. Paul understood that no chain, cell or hardship could remove him from God's plan. He wasn't in prison by accident. He was there by divine appointment. Secondly, we see that Paul had the best of times in the worst of times. Here's Paul in the prison cell, chained, and yet Sam Gordon says Paul's outlook shows us how we can make the best out of the worst situation. We only have to go through the Bible, think about this. Think of Joseph in Genesis, betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison. Yet Joseph later said to his brothers, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis chapter 50 verse 20. Paul and Joseph both saw life through the lens of God's sovereignty. Their circumstances didn't define them, God's purpose did. Both Joseph and Paul, in the darkest places, discovered divine opportunity. Of course, we know from the New Testament that Paul wrote some of his most powerful New Testament letters from the prison cell. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon, all written while Paul was in chains. What looked like confinement really was a mission field and God's purpose and plan for him. Thirdly, we see divine appointments and not accidents. Sam Gordon says there is no accidents in God's plans for our lives. All that happens is by divine appointment. Of course, this truth echoes Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that in all things God works for the good for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And that purpose, of course, is to make us, to conform us to his Son. Even suffering can become a stage for God's glory. We think of Daniel in the lion's den, and remember that chapter ends with the king praising the God of Daniel. Or Peter in prison in Acts chapter 12, where prayer was answered overnight. Both situations looked hopeless, yet God was at work behind the scenes. And so how to live with this outlook like the Apostle Paul? If Paul could see purpose in prison, we can see purpose in pressure. The key is to shift from asking, "Why, Lord?" to "What now, Lord?" When we are facing difficulties, remember, you're not where you are by mistake. When life feels unfair, trust your situation is under Christ's lordship, not human control. And when you feel confined, ask how God might use your change for his glory. Sam Gordon's insight captures Paul's faith as well. Even there in the prison cell, he sensed in his spirit that he was where God wanted him to be. And the same is true of me and you as a Christian. Wherever you are today, in a place of waiting, struggle or limitation, God has not lost sight of you. You are not forgotten. You've been there and placed by Christ. And so I trust that you find this encouragement in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 1. Thank you for listening.